Hello and welcome back. I always appreciate so much to have experts and especially knowledgeable experts like Istvátsa to come on because what we're seeing politically, yes, it's reminiscent of that Arizona-esque type of frame where there was definitely an anti-immigrant sentiment back in 2010, 2011, around there. But what we're seeing now is it's on a different level, people. It really is. Because here's one of the greatest gifts that you and I have to being here in the United States of America, and that is that we have constitutional rights and constitutional protections. And one of those constitutional rights is that everyone has the right to due process. What that is it's the 14th Amendment right of due process, in that an individual has the right to go through a court system, whether it's civil, criminal, immigration. Yes, even immigration courts have procedures and rules and laws that allow for a rightful process, because the individual who is being accused of breaking or violating procedures, a law, or whether they are being civilly sued, has the right to confront that accused or be able to present defenses against what they are being accused of. So what we're seeing, as it was reported today in New York Times, that Trump is saying that undocumented immigrants shouldn't get trials before deportation, which is a complete slap against our Constitution and for the processes that have been honed. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. But there are rights. There are systems in place and procedures to ensure that constitutional rights are not being trampled. And I, for one, will call out President Trump when I feel he's wrong, just like I had done so against Biden or Biden's administration. And in this, as an attorney, as an individual, as a very grateful first generation US citizen, I can see where this Trump, this setting aside or trying to argue that due process rights are not for deportees can easily be extended to others. Remember when we were looking at how they were ramming people's rights, whether there was a suspicion, and arresting them and keeping them like the Jan 6, individuals who may not have entered the Capitol or who may have been part of the, they were following the rest of the flock and going in. And even though they didn't destroy anything, if they were suspected of being part of that, they were arrested and they were being held and detained without possibility of getting bailed out. That was an affront on their due process rights, their constitutional rights. And also it was very scary then, as it is now, that they can turn this against you and I. Just like when they were going out after then Donald Trump, former President Trump, on bogus charges. Some of them were very much Trump. They were tricked up and elevated based on legislatures. Let's say
in the United States, we have a thing called the ocean in between us, right?
Oh, and there's Donald himself saying we do have this, but it needs to be bypassed. So these remarks that he made in the Oval Office Tuesday, that undocumented immigrants should not be entitled to trials, that is an affront on our Constitution. That is not who we are. And as my guest stated, in criminal court, any defendant has the right to an attorney. If they cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed. That's why we have public defenders. That's why we have court-appointed counsel as well. But in immigration court, that is not the case. There is not a right to an attorney. Now, if someone can afford an attorney, such as my previous guest, that is wonderful. And there are certain organizations, non-for-profit, that do provide assistance. But let's talk about this. You already have a system that is front loaded towards the immigration services for ICE, right? Because you don't have the right to an attorney, but you still have procedures and policies, judicial laws. I mean, there are laws on how these trials are to be held, what can be happening. And as East was saying, even whether there are certain exceptions to the rule, but this all has to come out so that we're not wrongfully grabbing people off the side of the street saying, oh, you're not here legally, off you go. That's not what it's supposed to be. And I'm sure I'm going to get backlash on this from certain individuals. But just remember this. The reality is if you happen to be of a certain skin tone, and yes, I don't like playing the race card, but the reality is that they will be targeting individuals that may not look like they are here, or if they speak a foreign language. And then there's the question, are they here undocumented? I mean, me, yes, I'm bilingual. Yes, I listen to Spanish music. Am I going to be questioned as to or have to prove whether I am in fact a U.S. citizen? Probably not, just because the racial profiling, I don't fall within it. But there are those that can take it too far, just as we have seen. You know what? The vast majority are great cops. The vast majority are great immigration services. And then you have one. And then we go on to like this gentleman here that is being shown, you know, where he is an MS-13 gang member, and the immigration court in 2019 and an appellate court in 2019 upheld his deportation order and found that, yes, he was part of this gang, but there was a withholding order put in. What basically says is, yes, there is a deportation order, but we are going to withhold deportation based on the fact that his attorneys were able to argue successfully that there was an actual physical threat to him if he was returned to his home country of El Salvador. Now he's there. Now, was there a deportation order? Yes. Was that withholding order on the basis that an opposing gang would physically be the reason why he should be staying in the country? Yes, and maybe they are wiped out. That is. But there is such a thing as a hearing. And we all know that President Trump loves to use hyperbolic, expansive, very dramatic language. Let's put it that way. And I know that he does it more for effect than maybe what is literal. Because one thing I have learned in following Donald Trump, and there are things that I do agree with Donald, I will say it. I also disagree with him on some things, like that deportee doesn't have the right to a hearing. That doesn't make sense to me. That's contrary to our Constitution. However, you got to look at what happened afterwards. And right now in Florida, what we're seeing is DeSantis jumping on his back to putting on the cape of anti-woke, and now it's anti-undocumented, and bringing in local law enforcement to weed out and assist in raids, which has clearly been stated in U.S. v. Arizona, United States versus Arizona, that immigration policies, immigration enforcement, immigration laws are wholly 100% under the jurisdiction of the federal government. Now, for those of us who say, absolutely, if you are a violent criminal, you should be deported. Absolutely. Let them go through the criminal process, or at least be deported. Because what's happening is if you get charged, let's say, for instance, if you're just driving down the street, you get pulled over and you have you get arrested for a driving while license suspended, or not without a license. And the judge puts sentences you to a few days in jail, let's say 10 days in jail. That triggers an ICE hold. That individual now will be subject to deportation or be picked up by immigration services. Now, is that a violent criminal? 80% they try to say 80%, but it's more like 56% of the people polled recently under a CBS poll have stated that they want all illegal immigrants out of the country, 11 million. However, what most people want are the violent criminals, the ones that are causing chaos, selling drugs, committing crimes, rape, everything. I mean, we're talking major gangbangers or major criminals. Then absolutely let them be arrested, let them have their day in court, and then have that deportation, because it's very important to note that they need to be placed under that process. But the bottom line is it has to go through a process. It has to be constitutional. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to continue talking about what is happening here in Florida, but then also why is it that the Democrats don't seem to get that they should be on a certain path to being able to gain more interest in them or approval rather than the path that they're going on, because this woke train of progressiveness is not helping them, especially as we're looking at the midterms. And that's something else that Trump has to be continuing to look at. What's going to happen in the midterm election? We're going to take a quick break, and then we will sum up some more of the politics that are affecting we, the people.